Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Now, we've got a lot of great folks here. This is the audio day, so if you've got audio questions, this is going to be a great day to ask those questions. We've got a great panel to answer your audio, any audio questions that you come up. I think we can probably answer them well. If you're in Mukana, of course, you can ask those questions there. You can vote on the questions. You can chat. If you're not in Mukana, you can go to askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global, and you can ask those questions 24/7. So if you see this later and you want to ask a question, you're like, oh, I should have asked a question that during the time you still can. And we'll just feed them in the next day and answer them then. So if you've got questions, go ahead and go to askofficehours.global or jump into Mukana. And let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one this morning comes from Paul Buchanan in Columbus, Ohio. And Paul says, what's the panel's favorite label maker?
Go ahead, Chris. Oh, we lost Chris. Go ahead,
Chris
Bill.
Stepped away. So for me,
here's what happened: is he was like, "Oh, I got to go get the label maker."
I already went and did that. Here's my favorite that I've had over the course of the years. I've had 3 or 4. I've had ones that were purely computer, and I've had things that were the older style. This one is a Brother P Touch, and I'm trying to remember the number of it. I can't see it here, but the thing I like about it is that it does have a USB port on the side. So if you want to drive it with your computer or something else, you can do so. But if not, it's got a full keyboard so that you can knock out a quick label without having to go get anything else. It uses the TZ format, so everything from 1 inch down to the pretty small, I think 6 millimeter P-Touch table. So that's my solution of choice.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, I stepped away. Totally love the thing. And the reason I like the thing, Bill, and I learned about it here, had to buy it. I love the fact that I can just do it from my phone. I can throw it in my box.
You said you love the thing, but what is the thing?
The thing, the printer.
There we go.
Sorry.
He had a different one. There we go. There you go.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. He likes a different one. He likes real keys.
It looked like
I
the
like
same thing.
real keys.
Oh, okay. So this is the one I like then. That's crap. So, no, sorry.
hey, clean show.
Sorry. It's less than ideal. No, the thing about this,
there we go.
I like the fact that it's durable and you're not going to accidentally hit or wear out a button when you throw it in your bag or in a crikey box. And then you just run it from your phone. It's so easy. You can save your files. You can print vertically, everything.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm in the Brother P-Touch crew as well. Similar to Bill, I have a little one with a keyboard in it. I find this handy when having to work on site. But if I have to print an array of labels, like say I have to label a 24 port patch bay, or do a lot of asset code tagging, that's when I switch over to the P-Touch Cube because I can do it through a phone or a computer. I just find having to use a phone or a computer cumbersome when on location. Important thing always is to have a large bag of variety of labels.
Yeah. This is the P-Touch that we're talking about there. It's I would get the Cube Plus. So there is a Cube and then there's a Cube Plus. There's about a $30 or $40 difference, and I would highly recommend the Cube Plus. You're going to have more format options there, and I bought this one, as you can see, 5 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago. And I've been using it constantly ever since. I don't have it right in front of me because it's sitting in the garage where I was labeling a bunch of things. And so it's a really, really good, and to Mickey's point, I have black labels and white labels, and I have thin ones and thick ones, and you can really do a lot of different things there. So you want to kind of build a bit of a collection there. But I think that I've had a lot of label makers all the way back to the remember the ones that used to punch into the plastic. So I grew up with one of those. It's a little circular one at the top.
Dymos.
The Dymos, and you turn it and clunk, clunk, and then you turn it and clunk, clunk. So that's what I grew up on. So I've been using label makers ever since. And I think the Cube right now is, other than maybe a Brady is, they make ones and they'll print on metal. So I do have a Brady in my garage that I use for some things that are a little bit more intense. But outside of Brady labelers, on a day-to-day basis, I would highly recommend the Cube. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next. A 5-bay Synology drive has a hot spare. What's the function of a hot spare?
Jeffrey?
Just like the spare tire in your car. So basically the drive has nothing on it. And what happens is if one of the drives decides to, it doesn't have to die. It just it sees a problem in it. What it'll do is it'll start transferring the files over to the hot spare, so it can repair that drive. Now, if you have two drives that are in disarray, it will not do that. It'll tell you, hey, you need to do some extra fixing, but it will help repair that one drive in as you go.
Mickey?
Yeah, as soon as a drive's own smart self-monitoring system detects that a drive is in critical condition, if you have designated a drive or multiple drives as a hot spare within a Synology box, it will immediately be used as a drive that's in active storage within a storage pool. So you have to assign a hot spare to a storage pool or multiple storage pools that it protects.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roland Booth in Jamaica. Pan-tilt zoom cameras mounted on walls or poles are often affected by vibrations. Is there a way to minimize this? A shock absorber of sorts?
Jeffrey?
Yeah, there's definitely different types of vibration assistance programs out there. Basically, they look like you have like little rubber feet on in between two plates, or some of them will have like little spring-looking things that'll just kind of protrude from the mount. It also depends on whether you're hanging the PTZ upright or upside down, and if you're doing poles are really tough because there's no real support, but a wall, you can actually reduce vibrations by where you move the PTZ camera. Make sure that's closer to a stud. And if you can try to get it in smack dab in the middle and you have a really big stud in the middle, then you can really get some good support off of that. But you can also try putting some neoprene in between the wall and the PTZ mount as well once you get one of these vibration assistant mounts.
Mickey?
Yeah, similar to what Jeffrey mentioned, I think the best way to minimize vibration is to start at the platform where your mounts are secured. Mounting them closer to a stud that, like what Jeffrey mentioned, or bracing them at 3 separate points with rigid mounting will give you a lot more stability with your camera mounts. But if there's not as much leeway in terms of your rigging, you can use, as Jeffrey mentioned, what they call them are vibration isolators. This is one that's popular for larger cinema style cameras. This is from ARRI, and then other companies have more affordable mounts, say from film devices.
That's great. Jeff?
So we actually had to get one of these for my house of worship. We installed a PTZ early on in COVID times, and it was on the face of the balcony, and people walking in the balcony caused vibrations in it. And I would recommend you not try maybe the cheap $30 to $50 little neoprene things that you'll find on eBay. Ours was a $350, $375 mount that went there, but it has solved the problem for years now.
Bill?
The two strategies that I used to use, either mass or suspension, and I got the lesson about suspension from the high-end mics that I bought that always have something like this. This is a Neumann suspension mount. Uses particular elastic cables, and it dampens a ton of vibration that you could normally hear. The mass thing, when I was doing a lot of remote shooting, we used to have boxes that we built to mount the cameras on before I got a thing called a spider pod. And in those cases, what I found is that if I put something heavy in the bottom of it, it would damp a lot of vibrations. I think you could extend that to maybe putting a more robust mount out and maybe putting a sandbag or something like that, and see if you mount the camera on top of that, if that mass dampens some of those vibrations. With what Jeff was talking about, if it's walking people in a balcony and the whole balcony is moving, nothing's really going to fix that easily without a lot of engineering.
I mean, one of the things to think about is also looking at what are the stabilization options for your PTZs. So when you buy the PTZs, different PTZs have different levels of image stabilization. That has gotten a lot better currently. The older image stabilization had a tendency to kind of hunt. It would kind of move around a little bit, trying to find its way there. And most of that in some of the newer cameras is pretty good. So you may want to look at that as well. It handles a lot of good high frequency stabilization. Doesn't handle large low frequency as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says Meta had an outage across all their social media platforms with EU DMA introducing alternative app stores to the mobile user. What do you think it will take to bring more people to alternative, decentralized social media platforms?
Nigel?
I think the answer is their audience has to be there. So if that's a social media for you and your family and friends, your family and friends have to be there. If you're trying to influence people, then the people you're trying to influence have got to be there. If you're trying to build a community, then the community's got to be there. So while lots of people are probably very uncomfortable not having access to Instagram for a couple of hours, the reality is until everybody moves, nobody's going to move. And those of us who've played with some of these decentralized things find A, our audience is not there, and B, they're just too difficult to use and not valuable. So the reality is first mover advantage is going to keep most people in the place they are, and we're going to have occasional outages to deal with.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, exactly. AT&T had an outage last week. We completely forgot about that already. We've got Twitter. We've got other places to go to. In fact, there was a joke that said, "Oh, look, everybody's flocking to X because Facebook is now down." So I think we got ways. And as Nigel said, decentralization. I don't know how to even get in my Blue Sky account half the time.
Yes. Next question.
Roland Booth in Jamaica is up next. What would your advice be for audio setup to capture an organ in a church, microphones, and EQ?
Jeff?
So I'll remind you, first of all, that the church is part of the instrument of the organ. So space and distance is your friend. I would recommend a spaced pair of omnidirectional mics. Omnidirectional mics are going to have flat, low-frequency response, which no directional mic does at a distance. Directional mics have problems with, they have proximity effect, which is a great thing, the boost of low frequencies when you get very close to the mic, but we never have our mics that close to organ pipes. We're talking within 1 meter or 2 meters. So you're going to be many meters away, capturing the entire room sounds. You're going to need omnidirectional mics to get the full low-end response of an organ, which can actually go below our hearing, below 20 hertz. Organs can go down lower than that. And if you get the right microphones, a really high-quality pair of omnidirectional condensers, then you don't need EQ.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I would like to point out that I raised my hand before Mr. Francis, and even before Mr. McAchore was in the room. So I will just fade into the background and let the adults take this one.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, certainly omnidirectional microphones will give you a more, natural capture of both the instrument and the church. And maybe we can touch on this a little later during our second hour about acoustics and how you can use acoustic spaces to your advantage. If you are a little limited in terms of your placement of your microphones, like say if it has to be a little more discreet on camera, for example, or even on stage, a little more discreet on stage, I'd probably go with a pencil small diaphragm condenser microphone, like for example, a Shure SM81. A pair of these might be good since they're quite small. They can be mounted a bit more discreetly.
Go ahead, Jeff.
If this is a purely recording situation, usually you're going to want to have tall mic stands. So oftentimes we're looking at lighting stands from Manfrotto go up, 13, 17 feet, and you're going to need sandbags or weights to stabilize those at the bottom. And as far as models of microphones, if you can go that direction, any of the high-quality Omnis from DPA, Danish Pro Audio, or Schoeps, or Sennheiser, those would be the great options.
Mickey?
Yeah, and it's a situation wherein it's just purely for audio recording. On top of the omnidirectional microphones, you can also build what is called a decatree array, wherein it gives you a nice capture of the natural space in a more what do you call this? It gives you in a way that gives you a better sense of space.
Next question.
Michael Patria in Warsaw, Poland's up next. And this is our first QR question this morning. I'm looking for a small projector that will display logos on acoustic panels in a small podcast studio. I'm worried about hearing the fan and the projector. Any recommendations?
Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's the hardest part when it comes to projectors. And I used to have, I still do, a ViewSonic, really nice small projector. I was trying to get the model number. I can't really remember it. But what you wanted to start thinking about doing instead, because there's going to be sound. That light needs to be cooled. That's the bottom line, is figuring out a way to enclose it so the fan sound is less. You can even also kind of build in, if you can do any type of construction to the area, build in vents where it will push all the air up. That way you can completely enclose that projector as best as possible, and then the sound goes up into the next floor or the attic.
Bill?
And don't necessarily look for a projector. There are small lighting instruments like ellipsoidal spotlights that you can actually get a glass gobo, stick it in front of the lens, and it'll project a perfect pattern without any fan or any hassle. You can only do one. You can't switch it out like you can with projector, but it's a simple, good source used all the time for this.
Mickey?
Yeah, what Bill said, a very popular brand for this would be the Dido light. They have a lens on it which focuses the beam of light, and you can buy or have custom gobos made, and they're usually made out of steel.
Perfect. Next question.
Next one comes from Francis Frey in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm experimenting with making my podcast a video podcast, 2 people in a studio and a remote guest. The wish list for AV tech is his or her question. No budget constraint, but requires ease of use of a single operator. Who is this person?
No budget constraint. You have released the Kraken. Go ahead.
Never say that on office hours.
Exactly. I always think of the Star Wars. It's like, more money than you can imagine. He's like, I can imagine a lot. So anyway, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a brave thing to say with this panel because, how many zeros do you have to spend? And I'm going to make a couple of assumptions that might be erroneous. If you're already doing an audio podcast and you've already got pretty good mics, so your sound is in a pretty good place. And if you don't, of course, that would be the first thing to fix. The second thing I'm going to do is that you're testing this idea. Therefore, you don't want to spend $100,000 to find out there isn't an audience for this video podcast. So you probably need to take a very simple step in, something like some Instalinks, set up really easy, Zoom, stuff like that. Enough lighting, make sure the set doesn't look too hideous. The other thing I want to focus on is this idea of a single operator. I don't know whether you're live streaming or you're recording or you're editing. But one of the hardest things I think for a one-person band is to really do this live and real. And so you're going to have to think about what software we're going to use. Are you going to use Ecamm? Are you going to use Mimo Live, which is becoming very popular with the crowd around here? But to some extent, I would think about what that environment looks like. How are you going to capture? How are you going to stream? What tools you're going to use? And I would make that decision alongside cameras and other things, because you'll find that will really alter what you're going to do. If you're going to go to Instalinks, then you're in USB. If you're going to go to something else, then you've got SDI and you've got all those sorts of technologies. But you've really got to lay down what you're going to do and how you're going to manage it. And then don't spend too much money until you know there's an audience. Because if the content is great, the audience will put up with it as you learn. And whatever you're going to do, it's going to be better by the time you've done it 10 times and better times when you've done it 100 times.
Mickey?
Yeah, I agree with Nigel. Since you're just starting out, figure things out first without spending too much money. And maybe one way to learn is to collaborate with others who are already doing this or are producing their own podcasts by themselves, and you can learn from them and what they have, build upon what they have already learned. One thing I would say though is, being a single operator, I would highly recommend having all your controls available to you with tactile access to it. So you don't necessarily, for example, if you want to bring a level up, you don't necessarily have to look at your mouse or your cursor on screen as you bring something up. There's a lot of value in being able to control, say, a fader without having to look at it, or control what you're cutting to without looking at the buttons, just looking at what you're producing on screen. I think there's also a lot of value in having, since again you're a single operator, using PTZ cameras, because you would not have the someone operating the camera on sticks or on a fluid head to reframe as your show is happening, as your guests or your talents move around. So having a PTZ camera is really valuable for this.
Go, Jeffrey.
And it really depends on what type of setup you have. Are you going to be cross-table, like I'm picturing that your podcast is? Or are you both sitting in chairs and next to a wall? So it'll be a situation like this where the camera comes forward. I would start with a single camera. If people like your audio podcast, then they're going to flock to your video podcast. And the best part is they'll watch you grow into a multi-cam situation and bring it in from there. As for hardware, if you don't want the hardware scene inside of the video scene, then something small like a Stream Deck or a touch screen will be something that you can use, because some of the software like a vMix or a Wirecast, you can easily just touch on the screen and do some scene switching from there. But it really depends on how you have your room set up before I can really suggest some camera setup placements.
Go ahead, Chris.
No budget constraint. Nobody mentioned holographs. Come on, this would be cool. So I would put the third guest on a monitor. And Alex, this is a question for you specifically. I would experiment with putting that person on set on a practical monitor on a vertical monitor. And my question to you, Alex, on the Twit channel with Leo, he's using horizontal monitors, and the monitors are so wide apart that in the wide shot, it looks like you guys are still social distancing. Has he ever considered rotating those and doing them vertical?
It's just not the way the studio's built. I mean, I'm going to agree with you. It's just, but
it'd be kind of cool, right?
Built. Yeah,
it's like it looks like a person does, and it lets you see the set behind him.
Yeah. No, I think that since we're not talking about budget, so the space. Since we're not talking about budget, I'm going to give you all the things. You can just pick and choose which parts you want. I've built a couple of these at different levels. The space that you're looking for, in my opinion, is probably a 25 by 25 by 12. So you want about 12 feet, a 12-foot high capacity. That's so you can hang your lights. They're not going to be 12 feet. But here's the thing: is you think about it longer. I've done it. In fact, I'm going to show you pictures from one that I built that has much lower ceilings. But the problem really is it's a seated only studio. You can't, if you want to be standing with lights at a reasonable space, you need 12 feet. You're going to drop a grid 6 inches below that. You have to remember that the lights are going to hang another foot and a half below that. And so you're going to lose a couple feet, as you go through that. And then you still want them up there out of the way so that you can shoot a wide shot and see everybody. If you don't care about that, it's not as big of a deal. You need about 25 by 25, in my opinion. If you're not talking about budget, float that room. So the big problem, I built a studio without floating it, and they started pounding outside of my right outside my window. I don't even know if a floated room would have fixed that. But the point is that I still got traffic and all kinds of other things. So if you're going to put money into a studio, really think about floating that studio, because you need to be able to cut it. And the bigger the distance is between the walls, the lower the frequency that you're getting rid of. And so you really want to see if you can get at least 6 inches of gap there to make that work. And then you want something really thick that's going to stop it even from getting past that. So a lot of times when we walk into big old sound stages, we see 5 inches of moving blankets bolted to the wall, because it not only absorbs things that are hitting it, but it basically makes not a lot goes through it. So think about those walls really hard before you do it. Now, inside of that, what we've done in the past is, I got the wrong, I just moved my monitors and now I'm in the wrong. Hold on, let me, this was so nice and clean. And now I look like a fool. I'm in the wrong monitor. I can't show you anything. Let me just pull this over here and then go back to screen. Here is the pieces of a, so here's one that I was kind of putting together here. So this is one we built. And so what's interesting about this wall here, this is all 80/20 that's all put there. And what we ended up doing is putting magnets in the thing. What this allows you to do is change the set. I don't know why I had a picture of that, but here's, you can see the set. So the set, while it looks physical and out of focus, it looks pretty good. We could change the whole set in about 45 minutes. So you could slide everything out and slide everything back in based on that. So you can see the magnets here, and we simply had places, and these are openings so that we can attach a monitor to it. And again, those are and here's like shelving and everything else, but all of this just simply pulls out. Like you just grab onto it and pull it out of the set. And we had, lights coming in from here. So this was all kind of how we had that set up there. So you can kind of see it built out. Now, one of the things that I would think about for what you're doing is, and again, you can build this all the way around if you want. If you want to build that, you might want a little bit more space, like a 30 by 30, to have that there. This table is probably a little too small for what we were doing, for what you're doing. But what I would do is put a person here, and then what I would follow Chris's idea of doing. I love the idea of a vertical monitor there, to put it there. Now, what you want to do is have cameras that are shooting these gaps. So they're shooting. Everyone's shooting there, and you could even have a high one that's kind of shooting the wide of this person, even though you'll go to their single. What'll happen is it'll look, if you have a lot of soft lighting in here, it's going to make it really feel like they're kind of, what we've done a lot of times is had an air star, but you can use a lot of different things to soften that up. So it really feels like they're sitting around a table talking to each other. What I would do is drill holes into your table and drop out a stand much like the one that I have here. This is an OC White Ultima 2 or whatever, 3. It's a low profile and articulating arm, which a lot of people use for their studios. I think Rogan uses this. I think a lot of other people do. I know that a lot of podcast studios have them in there because they're underslung, so they're out of the way. And then you're going to typically, the most common mic that you're going to use is an SM7B, and that's because it has a lot of off-axis rejection. It is resistant to plosives. You can go right up to it. So those are really good mics to kind of use for that podcasting area. For the cameras, I would really look at FR7s. So the Sony FR7s are the PTZ to use inside of a space right now. Full frame sensor. You can put in some great lenses, get nice short depth of field. And what's the advantage? You might want to ask, like, why would I use a full frame sensor inside of a little podcast studio? It'll make your studio look twice as big. So the bigger the lens, the bigger the depth of field is going to drop off a lot faster with a full frame sensor. And so what you're going to be able to do, and the Sony autofocus is going to allow you to drop that, lower that down, and it's going to do a lot of work for you. So especially if you're a single person putting these together, you want to have that autofocus. You're going to want to have that large sensor. You're going to want to drop that off there. So those are the kind of things that I would think about in those areas. One thing not to forget is your remote. So make sure that you're building kits. If you're going to put all this money into the studio, make sure that you have a remote kit that you're going to send out to people. We, at minimum, for the Michael Krasny show, we at minimum send out an MV7 just as a mic, just to fix things. So when we send that out to almost every person that will accept it. Some people are like, oh, I got my own mic, which are always bad. So every time someone has that, they're like, I have my own mic and I do this all the time. And you're like, well, that's going to stink. Anyway, but you put up with it. And but if you can, you send out the MV7s or something like it. Make sure that you're thinking about the remote side of it, because they're the ones that they're gonna stick a spike in your show. But I think that if you are, the other thing to think about is if you want to deliver to the person on the far end, you may want to deliver to them ISOs of each person, the two people talking, because they're in a Zoom environment or they're in some other environment. Let them see you, because you don't necessarily want to send program back to them. You want to send back something so that they're interacting with the folks that they're looking at there. So those are some of the things that I would think about there. As far in some pretty particulars, you're going to build a grid. You can use. We were talking about The unistrut grids that look a little nicer, I oftentimes, as you can see here, I I just attached all these lights to the ceiling here. You have the little scissor clips, but I would recommend generally some kind of grid up there that's going to pull those down. So those are some things to think about there. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas says Microsoft plans to end support for its Android subsystem in Windows 11 on March 5th, 2025, and consequently end support for the Amazon App Store on Windows 2. Will this affect you or impact you?
Jeffrey?
This group? No. But basically, yeah, what was going on was that Microsoft was working with Amazon and the App Store. And the problem with the App Store is it is not Google Play, and there's apps that don't cross over too well. In fact, all my Kindles, I have to sideload my the Google Play just to get some of the apps that I need onto that. So that's the reason why they're doing it. And of course, once again, you have a year before all the apps, download your apps now, of course, but you have a year to get into something other than whatever app you're using. And there's several different alternatives that are on the Windows Store already.
And this is just for the Amazon, is this for the Amazon Android devices only?
Yeah,
or is this...
there was the idea that it was for to partner with Amazon. And if Windows 10
these
actually
are
was
all the different Amazon, like their little tablets, which we found, we were like, hey, this won't cost very much. Let's buy these tablets. And then we bought one to test it. And we were like, this is worthless. So we went to the Samsung ones pretty quickly. We were like, they weren't useful for us at all. I'm not surprised that they're leaving. No, I don't think it's affecting anybody here. Next question.
Jeff Veely in Henderson, Texas is up next. I'm a performer that's seeking a tiny Wi-Fi router to use on stage for my devices to communicate. What's the panel's recommendations? And Jeff notes, I still have an Airport Express handy.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, my recommendation for this would be the GLINet XE3000. It's been a really, really nice device to bring on the road.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's what I was going to recommend too. Just keep in mind, try and get something that's Wi-Fi 6 over Wi-Fi 5, and then when the Wi-Fi 7s come out, go for that.
Next question.
Next question comes from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Blacksburg, Virginia today. What codec can come natively out of Premiere and After Effects that can support transparency?
Mickey?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if Premiere can output video with transparency in it. Someone can fill in on that. But what I see most often used nowadays for say graphics with transparency in it are either ProRes 4444 4x4 or TIFF sequence, which is used more in a larger scale project situation.
Chris?
Yeah, Tlaloc, I was going to double check on the Premiere thing, but I don't have it installed. I will tell you this. I render everything out of After Effects, and I run After Effects every day. Everything as ProRes 4x4. I would be shocked if Premiere couldn't output it as well. I used to use Animation Codec, but Animation Codec is like 10 times the size and basically does the same thing. It might look a little better, but nobody is going to be able to see it. ProRes 4x4 is probably the way to go.
Next question.
Michael Patria, Poland, says, have any of you had experience with transparent LG TVs? Is it a good idea to display multimedia in a TV studio?
Nigel?
So I think it's a fun way of showing it. I wouldn't base any serious production around it. They've been around for a couple of years now. When you look at them, they're pretty cool. And they may be good in a backdrop. I just wouldn't necessarily use them yet for production. If the multimedia is key to the communication of the content that you're communicating, I would find probably a better way of displaying that at this point.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I saw them from LG and from Samsung this year at CES. Samsung, in this situation, I think Samsung had the better option, although it was kind of wonky when I did see it. So basically they had a monitor, and then they had a wall, and then of course they had the transparency from there. So if you had like graphics like wow, you could put them onto the transparent TV and then have whatever going on behind you in the big TV. But of course, if you're putting them in a TV studio behind somebody, you're going to have to deal with lighting, you're going to have to deal with reflections and everything like that. In an audio recording studio, though, you can actually have, that glass that the production person has to see the band. That's a great situation for that type of glass, because now you can have the controls at eyesight, so you can make the switches as you go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think that right now, I would say that if you're comparing form and function, this is the form and this is the function. So I don't think that there's a lot of value to these yet, but it doesn't mean that there won't be. A lot of times we see things that aren't very useful when they start, and when they mature a couple versions, couple years, they start to become more useful. So I think the jury's out right now. I wouldn't buy one at the moment, but I think that I would keep on tracking that solution. Next question.
Tommy Schatz, St. Paul, Minnesota. How is NDI working with Mimo Live, and how does it compare with OBS or vMix?
So I've used it with Mimo, but only with my phone over Wi-Fi, and it's worked fine. So you can connect your phone over Mimo. I did it a long time ago with Mimo Live, and used to use it as my kind of like, hey, look at this, look at what I'm doing here, and connected it over just HX, and it was working fine. I don't use it that heavily. I know that Oliver is building an entire rig that is all NDI based. Inside, so he's got a whole rig that he's built in the past. I think he might have shown it in the last lab. He probably show it tomorrow in his lab if you ask him. But he's got a whole NDI rig that he's built. So there's a lot of focus from Mimo on NDI. I can't compare how it works versus OBS or vMix, but it does. I know that there's a lot of dedication to making NDI work on Mimo. So I would check it out. Next question.
Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri. Any new info from the remotes?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So we've had several members kind of go on hiatus for different reasons, work and personal reasons. And so we've kind of been regrouping, and we actually have 2 songs that are gems of ideas and are in progress, but still moving along as remotes. And if anyone out there wants to come join us, go to the remotes page on Discord and show up for a meeting every other Tuesday.
I think I'm going to talk to my daughter about it. It could be her 5th band that she's in right now. She's playing bass and drums in a couple other bands. So maybe we'll see if we can get her in there. Next question.
Send her along.
Yeah.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Seems like the USB-C connector on one of my Blackmagic Design pocket cams is not making a good connection, so I can't record to SSD drives. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, USB-C isn't really designed for a lot of insertion cycles, and also I wouldn't recommend using it in a production setting, since it's a non-locking connector, and you're at the mercy of just friction holding the media in. I would recommend switching over to a more production grade media solution like CFast cards for this.
Next question.
Next one comes from Walt Palmer in Lewis, Delaware. I have the opportunity to send one of my radio show hosts to Israel to report for 1 week. My concerns are reliable internet for the Zoom connection, security, and transporting equipment in and out of the U.S., Carnes, basically.
Mickey?
My recommendation for this is to reach out to other members of the AP, Associated Press, because they already have a large knowledge base of what actually works on site.
Go, Jeffrey.
There are a couple of office hours people that are in Israel right now, and you could probably talk to them, definitely. TCS Telecom is, I believe, the primary provider inside of Israel, and it really depends on where you go. If you're going to something like Jerusalem, you'll have a lot less options than if you do something like Tel Aviv. And, of course, with the instability in Israel, it's going to be a lot tougher to do any type of stuff. As for for going in and going out of the United States, they're going to be doing a lot more inspection. They might even just open up your cases and pull everything. I've had this happen. They pulled everything out and to run them individually and then put them back in. And so you have to make sure that everything that they pulled out went back into the case.
Yeah, for Israel, there is a obviously I believe that Israel is a carnet country that you can work through there. The main thing when you go in there is to make sure that you pack things so that they're easy, as Jeffrey pointed out, is make sure you pack things so that they're easy to open up and look at and put back together, and you understand how that's going to actually look, because you are going to do it in front of them. And so it's relatively easy to get in. The one thing to know is get there early, because there's a lot of extra security in the plane at your home airport. So you're going to want to get there 2.5 to 3 hours before to be able to get through that, because they're going to go through a different level of security as you get on the plane. Once you get there, it's actually pretty easy going. What's really important is to be ready with the information that you have when you get to customs, and to be able to answer those questions quickly. If you start to slow down on your questions, is when you start to end up in slowing down your answers in Israel means that you're going to spend a lot more time talking to somebody about it. So you need to be able to have that information kind of at the top of your head. Once you get in, again, Israel in general is a pretty safe place because there's a lot of security around. And so I spent a fair bit of time in Tel Aviv doing some work there, and there was no time where I felt that I didn't feel safe. And and I will admit I left a couple days before there was some trouble. But we had a great time in Tel Aviv doing the production that we did. What I will say is, getting out, they tell you to be there 3 hours early. You should be there 3 hours early if you have hardware. I came out with a bunch of gear, and I ended up covering 4 6-foot tables with all my gear unwrapped, laid out over the table as they went through it. They wanted to keep my sound devices 442 because they hadn't seen one before. And they were like, "Hey, we have to keep this." I'm like, "I need that in New York." And I'm pretty sure the only reason that I got out of Israel was because we were doing a show with Bar Raffaelli, which they knew who it was, and she happened to post a picture of me on her Instagram. So it was the only way we got out of the country. So anyway, so I think that's you have to be the time getting out and making sure that everything's very clear and laid out, and so they can see it. You want to think about, well, how does an X-ray see things when you put things through? Because if they don't understand it, they're going to pull it out, and they have no problem spending all afternoon on your hardware. So just know that it's getting out of Israel that seemed to be much harder than getting into Israel. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Up next, Meet Stream Master, the ad says. He starts his thing with the Logitech MX Brio 4K Ultra HD collaboration and streaming webcam is, in scare quotes, twice as good as the original Brio. Comments?
Is this something that just came out? Is this a new Brio or just a new marketing campaign? I'm not clear.
It's a new Brio.
New Brio? Yeah. I mean, it would be. I think that the hard part is, do we know what the price is on it? The link that was sent here is not did not go directly to what we were.
$199.
Oh, $199. Yeah, I mean, I think that the there's the MX Brio is $199. It could be cool. I mean, we'd have to look at it. It looks very shiny. Here's what it looks like. So, as for those of us who have used Brios in the past. Let me pull this up for you here. Sorry, this is what this looks like here. So this definitely is it's changed the form factor a lot. So I mean, it looks nice. I think that here's the specs and details. Let's see what we want to look for are things like there's the webcam, there's the mounting clips. Let's see if they tell us what. 4K 30, that's fine. 1080 60, that's great. We want to look for the image sensor size. They tell us what the image sensor resolution is. That usually is not a good sign. That where they're not telling us what. Now, what I'm curious about here when I look at these, so when I'm looking at the data without actually testing the camera, I'm looking for, like, what does that mean? Is that something they're doing in the lens, or is that something are they just cropping the sensor? So I want to know whether they're cropping that sensor and zooming in and out, because 65 degrees optically onto the whole sensor, that's exciting. Like that's the right format for most of the things that we're doing there. We can look at the 8.5 megapixel Sony Starvis. We'll take a look at that and see how big that is. But a larger, we want some shorter depth of field actually to make these things actually work. I mean, it's a nice form factor. I like the fact that it is doesn't have a cable coming out. The cable can be attached there. I'm thinking that this is a big lens, but I don't know what that actually, what does that mean? Is that interchangeable? Is it or is it just for show? We don't really understand. I don't quite understand what they're putting there. But if it's a large format, it could be interesting. They're claiming HDR, but again, the thing that I'm looking for, things like how big is that sensor, is going to tell me a lot about what we're looking for. Mic range, who cares? Don't use the mic on the thing ever. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I think you got to the sensor size. It's hard to tell from the information they've communicated whether this is fundamentally a repackaging of what they have or something fundamentally different.
Yeah,
I suspect what it is a rebranding. I'm not saying the product isn't upgraded, but I'm saying there's a rebranding around the MX series. They're trying to make that a coherent family of products across what they're doing. So they've repackaged it and maybe upgraded some parts of it to fit into the MX family of products. And they have made it available in 3 different colors.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think they're focusing a lot on the AI ability of this. They're also competing in this market with the Facecam Pro, so it's going to be about a $300 device. But it's all going to depend on the software, and if the Longitude software isn't improved, then the camera's not going to be that great.
It does look like it is close to a 1-inch sensor, so it could be theoretically, the Starvis 8.5 megapixel imager, it looks in other cameras, looks like if it's actually that big, it could be an actually interesting, and no matter how much I like to resist buying new cameras, I might have to buy it for research. I will say that for a little bit more money, you can get the Insta360 link, and you've got a lot of software on a PTZ. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Samuel Nordvik in Norway. Do you have experience with dedicated DSP processors that can be used with a DAW, digital audio workstation like Reaper, to achieve low latency mixing? Any good ones that are more affordable than a good digital mixer with a Dante card, does not need analog inputs?
Go ahead, Mickey.
What we use in for Pro Tools are the Avid HDX systems, and they have dedicated DSP cards that you can stack, I believe, up to 3 cards in a single system. And for the types of programming that we work on, it would be very difficult to run a full TV or narrative feature length of session right on the general purpose CPU that come with the computer. So a lot of our work requires HDX cards. If you're working with Reaper, one option is the UAD satellites, but do know that they only accelerate universal audio plugins.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I would make the case that a hardware mixer is going to give you low latency and be much less prone to crashing than running in a DAW if you're trying to do live low latency mixing.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Jeff, you make a good point about the church being part of the organ. Can that work against you when adding modern PA, video, or lighting to a traditional church space, especially when effectively miking the pastor for recording and or streaming?
Jeff?
It can definitely work against you. Spaces are designed for certain things. So this was a chart that an acoustician gave me about a church we were talking about, and you can see on the left there's the reverb time of the room, and kind of looking in the 1 second reverb time is the kind of the minimum that you want for amplified and contemporary music, which is much more reverberant than, say, a courtroom or a boardroom or a classroom you want to be for just pure speech. And getting beyond that second or second and a half, speech becomes very unintelligible because the reverb is too long. But getting up into organ and choir music that is designed to be acoustic, unamplified, and have that reverberant space, it's going to get up well beyond that 1.5 thing up into the 2-second range. And that's going to be what's desirable for that type of traditional music. So there's definitely competing goals there in the acoustics of the room, whether you want it to work for organ music or whether you want it to work for speech. Now, you're asking about miking the pastor for recording and streaming. Recording and streaming are not being amplified in the room. But still, can the spoken word be heard in a room that is designed for organ and church music, choir? That's a constant battle in houses of worship.
Next question.
Scott Tupper in Livermore, California. What is a compact and cost-effective audio interface for getting balanced audio into an iPhone 15 Pro Max?
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I'd say what I would recommend for this would be something like a MixPre 3. It's certainly quite compact in size, and a plus side for this is it will also keep charge on the iPhone because it has its own battery source. You're not relying on the device to provide power, and you can also get rid of the need to have a USB hub that powers both the interface and also the iPhone.
Yeah, and there's a couple different interfaces that'll work there. You can get them as little as $150. The real problem is you're starting to give up preamps, and so you're going to get much better preamps with a MixPre, as Mickey said. The one that I've used the most recently is actually the old USB Pre 2 that I had to capture a bunch of stuff to my phone, and found that worked just fine as well. So pretty much any interface, when you think about it, any USB interface will work. If they are externally powered, they'll power the phone. If they're not externally powered, the phone will power them. So you have to kind of think about that from a battery life perspective. But there's also some really compact ones as well. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, if it's about portability, you definitely want to have something with a battery, because you can plug almost any type of audio device into the iPhone 15 now with the right cable. So if it's just a question of whether you want to plug it in, whether you want to use a battery. An alternative that's pretty low cost, check out IK Multimedia. They have their Quattro, which you can plug in 4 microphones into, and you have all the options right on the unit, just like a Zoom or anything like that. So you can do a little bit of recording from there. And then, of course, you have your Zooms and you have your older devices. Once again, if they can be USB connected, you can get the right cable and put them into the 15.
Yeah, and for my portable rig, I have actually a Saramonic, which works great. I have one for Lightning and one with USB-C, and those are relatively inexpensive, $150, $200. Again, what you're paying for as you start to go up is the quality of the preamps. And so if you really want a high-quality signal, you're going to pay a little bit more to have analog limiters as well as solid preamps. So that's the big advantage of going towards something like sound devices. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsoy of Tromsø, Norway says, inspiration for the remotes. Okay, so making music just became a new experience using Suno.ai. How long before I can start making big money as a musician?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I saw that. I went to their site, and this first splash page just kind of blew me away. So I guess you just say, make a song about my Aunt Edna, and then, I guess 5 seconds later, you have a song about Aunt Edmund. So I'm sure everybody who uses this is going to become a gigantic pop, rock, or rap star immediately. So go for it.
Good, Jeffrey.
When it comes to AI creation, it's gonna be all about how they culture the copyright laws for AI creation. I have a friend that's been making an AI program where you take a picture of some art, like let's say the Scream or something like that, and it will actually turn it into music. Now, whose creation is that? Is it the person that pointed the camera, or is it the person that painted the picture? That's where we're going to get into any type of issues from there. So I'm guessing a lot of this stuff will be pretty much some sort of creative copyright free.
Yeah, the big question, the big danger for a lot of artists is the fact that there's a huge number of people that just don't care about the copyright. Like they don't care about whether they have copyright for it or not. They're just enjoying it and putting it on TikTok. So the ownership question doesn't really mean anything to 99% of the market because they don't care if they own it. They just, and so the thing is that's like, if you look at TikTok is built around other people using your content. People put things up with the hope that other people will use their content. Like it's a completely different thought process than everything else that's there. And so I think that the copyright thing becomes less important to them other than not taking down their video. Like that's all they care about is that someone doesn't take down their video or possibly demonetize it. And even I know creators that will put stuff up knowing it'll be demonetized because everything else on their channel is monetized and they're very careful about it. And then they put up things that have impact and they use copyrighted material knowing that they're just going to just give up revenue on that one, but it's drawing more subscribers, it's drawing more viewers, it's doing other things for all their other content. So it just really depends on how you view it. I think that the old traditional kind of crusty music business is worried a lot about copyright of whether they own it when they create it, but the new version of this is not worried about it. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think Jonas said it really well. He said when you guys started playing with ChatGPT, he said everybody likes writing stuff with AI, but very few people like reading it.
Yeah, this gets back into it.
Music.
Content is easy to make or easy to watch, but never or very rarely both, and so you can put out a lot of junk. I mean, and the thing is it's like a slot machine as opposed to playing, Texas Hold'em. Like if you have some skill and some other things, you might be able to make some money with a slot machine. You just keep on pulling that arm until you hope that something shows up on the other end. And I think when you're doing AI, you're just pulling the slot machine. What?
That's the slot machine skill is you have to know when to change to the next machine.
Exactly.
Total skill.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Just to clarify, what's the noise floor in digital audio, 32 or 24-bit? Isn't 0 just 0?
I'll go ahead, Jeff.
It would be 0, Roscoe, if it weren't for dither. So more commonly, we talk about in digital audio signal to error, because how is the digitized signal, the quantized signal, different from the incoming analog? And if you're a large level signal, the errors are random. When you get down into low level signal, the errors become correlated to the actual waveform. Here's a sine wave that's a fairly low level. It's going through about 8 levels of quantization. So that's going to be very, 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 very quiet. But you can see that the error, that little tiny blue line, is actually related to the signals, and so it's going to sound like distortion. What digital audio, analog to digital converters do, or even a digital math, adds dither. Dither is a very low-level noise that is added into the signal to randomize those errors so that they are just random errors as opposed to correlated errors, so it sounds like noise, not distortion. So what's the noise floor of digital audio? It's the dither. It's about 144 dB down for 24-bit. It's 144 dB down for 32-bit, because 32-bit takes 24-bit resolution, 144 dB of signal to noise, signal to dither, and it just shifts that 24-bit up and down. So it can get very extreme louds and very low quiets, but not at the same time. So the signal to noise ratio of both 24-bit and 32-bit is the same.
Mickey?
And yeah, just to add to what Jeff mentioned at the end there, for 32-bit float, it's minus 758 dB. That's where the noise of the dither lies. And at the end of Roscoe's question, he asks, isn't 0 just 0? The thing with digital audio is 0 dBFS is clipping. So that is not where the noise floor lives, not at 0 dBFS. That is the loudest point in 24-bit and 32-bit.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says, Alex, can you share examples of AI prompts to get your images? Would like to learn the thought process behind to create images like the one yesterday with the Photoshop cleanup.
Yeah, we should do another prompting. We haven't done it for a while, but a prompting probably on a Tuesday. We'll just talk about some graphics and we'll show some stuff that we've created. Maybe even do some of them live and just see what comes out the other end. I'll turn it up to turbo and we'll pop those up. The one that I showed yesterday when we were talking about the keying was this one, and that one was created as Know-It-All Man with glasses yelling into a Shure SM58 microphone on a floor stand over a plain white background, 20% padding in the style of Pixar, and that's version 6. So that's what I asked for, and that's what I got. But I made a bunch of them and then styled them all together. We'll be talking about acoustics in the real world here in just a minute. But tomorrow we'll be talking about auto clipping with AI. So we've been doing a little bit of work with Opus, and we'll kind of talk about how we're doing that and how we approach it and how we think about it there. We'll talk about multi-streaming on Friday. Why would you multi-stream? And how we're approaching it right now and how we're thinking about it as we go towards that with office hours. And then on Saturday, of course, is the weekend Q&A, up to 2 hours of Q&A, depending on how many questions we have. Sunday is introspection. Really, if you ask questions about office hours, oftentimes during the week, we'll just say that's a Sunday question. It's a Sunday question. So if you have questions about office hours or concerns or things you want to discuss, that is the place to do it. And where we welcome your questions. It's not streamed, but we do talk about them in a long way. Welcome back for the second hour, and we're going to be talking about audio and how it interacts. We've got a lot of questions already starting to stack up here, but we'll let our panel talk a little bit if they'd like to about how audio works in the real world. So, I mean, I think that sound in the physical world is something for us to, is something we have to understand because, this gets into, for instance, someone says, well, what kind of mic should I get? And the first thing I'll ask them is, well, what kind of room do you have? Are you going to be outside, inside? How busy is it around you? And that is an understanding of, I need to understand what your environment is, and I need to understand how sound works so I can understand what to do with it. So as we understand those principles, it really puts us in a position to be able to find the right solutions to make that actually happen. Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead if you want to say a couple things there.
So I thought this was a great topic. I know we want to talk in a few weeks about soundproofing, and I'm sure we'll talk about some soundproofing today and also room treatment, which are two very different things. But I thought it'd be good to lay some basics of how sound works in the real world. And so we probably all remember from high school physics that sound is a pressure wave and the molecules bounce against each other. And that wave propagates out from the sound source at the speed of sound. And the speed of sound is kind of slow. We're used to light. Light is nearly instantaneous. We're used to sound going through a workstation or a console, and it goes through really, really fast. But the speed of sound is actually pretty slow, around 1,130 feet per second, 344 meters per second. It changes a little bit with temperature and humidity, but those are good numbers. I prefer rules of thumb. So I would say about a foot a millisecond, or about 40 feet per frame if you're talking 30 frames per second, or about 5 seconds for sound to go a mile. So if you see a lightning flash off in the distance and you count 1001, 1002 up to 1005, you've gone 5 seconds, and then you hear the thunder, you know that lightning strike was about a mile away because the light got to you nearly instantaneously and the sound took a long time. Also, our vision, we can see about an octave of light, visible light. That's a doubling of frequency. But our hearing goes from about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. That's 10 doublings. That's 10 octaves. But it's 1,000 factor in the frequency, which is also then 1,000 factor in the wavelength. How far apart are those molecules, the compressions from the next compression? And that's where, the size of audio waves is really important. And I had a student come to me one time ago. I just can't get my mind wrapped around this. And we worked for a while, and she came up with this idea of tell me some stuff in the real world that's the size of audio waves. So if you think about a 20 hertz wave, it's about 56 feet long. That's a tractor trailer. Okay, so the lowest frequency you can hear, when that's out in the world, one compression wave is at one end of the tractor trailer, and the next compression wave, if you could freeze the molecules, is at the other end of the tractor trailer. That's a big wave. And so low frequency waves, you think about a piccolo versus a tuba, low frequencies need large instruments. Low frequency waves out in the real world are big. High frequency waves are really small. That doesn't happen in a DAW. That doesn't happen in a console. It doesn't happen in a wire. All the waves are treated equally. But out in the real world, the low frequencies are troublesome because they're big. If we go up a little bit, you get into ceiling height is around 120 to 120 hertz. That's 8-9 feet tall. You move up into like a piece of paper. You're talking about 1.5 kilohertz. Really important one, the distance between your ears. That's about 2K. So these, as you get higher in frequency, these waves, and then you get all the way up to the top of audio. A mic stand is 5/8 of an inch. That's about a 20 kilohertz wave. So that's a really good, I think, way to judge and think about when you get sound in the real world, because it's much easier to dampen, capture, absorb, whatever, a high frequency wave because it's so small than it is a low frequency wave. There, I'll pause and let someone else talk.
Go, Bill.
I just had a couple of things. Most of my life has been spent recording the human voice for radio and other things where it's spoken word. I don't do as much with music. I've done some things over the course of the years, but it really was starting there for me. And so I had to spend some time when I first got into radio and was doing that. Things like microphones, people would ask me, what's the best microphone? Still to this day, they ask that for voiceover. And it's an impossible question to answer. There are thousands of different microphones out there. All of them will record the human voice, but in particular circumstances, there's always something that seems to work slightly better or even substantially better than something else. And finding that for the particular voice you're recording is an art. It's not a science. You can tell some mics are accurate, some are colored, and the rest of that. There's also just been a change in how people listen. I go back to the early days when you had these big bombastic singers like Rudy Valley in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and they had these big booming voices. They did not have very accurate capture systems. We still have recordings from those days, and you can still hear performance in there. But you combine or contrast a singer like Rudy Valley from somebody like Billie Eilish, who has an amazingly delicate, whispery delivery. And she is benefiting tremendously from these massive increases in the ability of our recording and transmission modes to capture nuance and detail and the smallest variations, and to make something beautiful out of something that would have been really hard to record 50, 60 years ago. So we're always chasing this idea of, how do I get the sound that I don't want? Bad spaces, hums, wind going by in an outdoor recording. How do I get rid of those things and get down to the pristine signal that I want to capture? And I don't think it's ever going to be super easy. It requires a lot of understanding, a lot of technique, and a lot of effort to elevate your game to the point where you do what Jeff does, or what somebody who's an extraordinary recordist or an extraordinary PA mixer or an extraordinary anything, because it's just not easy. It's a very subtle art, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Chris.
Jeff, that was brilliant. I love the visuals to talk about the frequencies. It makes me want to imagine a world where somebody writes like a concerto played on a semi-truck. Like how do you, first of all, how do you mic a semi-truck? But what do you beat it with to get those low frequency
It probably already exists.
It should, and we should find it. I don't have good enough speakers to play it, but that demonstration of the sizes of things and wavelengths, that was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. So some other general things about how sound works in the world, we should probably mention the inverse square law. As sound propagates away from whatever sound source, we all know this, we've lived in the real world, sound gets quieter as you get farther from it. And that's because the sound is dispersing into a bigger sphere. I think about this as you like toast, you want butter on your toast, but you're lazy, so you don't want to butter your toast. So you make a butter gun. You put one pat of butter in it, and you shoot it at your piece of toast, and you get an entire pat of butter that fills the piece of toast. And if you move the toast farther away, you can actually shoot, and you can hit 4 pieces of toast. But now you get 1/4 the butter on each piece of toast. And if you move it 3 times farther away, you get 9 pieces of toast, but 1/9 the butter on each of those. Well, that's how sound works. We like decibels better, so it's easier to think about 6 dB per doubling of distance. If sound is hitting you at 80 decibels SPL and you're 10 feet away from the speaker and you move to 20 feet away from the speaker, it should drop 6 decibels to 74 dB SPL. So that's just a good way to think about. Remember that sound will do that. If you get into rooms, the reflections of those rooms will make that less. So the worst case or best case, however you want to look at it, the most attenuation you're going to get is 6 dB per doubling of distance. You got to get a very small source in a very empty room. If you get walls or you get sources that are large, and that's why we build line arrays, those don't dissipate as fast. We should also think about sound does all those things that light does. We kind of learned about these things in physics class about light, but sound reflects. So sound will hit a barrier and it will either reflect or be absorbed by it, or usually both. It's also important to think about, we look in the mirror in the morning and there's another person over there. That is the reflected image. Well, same thing with sound. The reflection off a wall is like there is another sound generating thing on the other side of that wall. There's an audio image of that. Usually we speak more about absorption, and most things, this is a 2-inch panel and a 4-inch panel of acoustic linear fiberglass. And you see that perfect absorption is going to be 1. That's a factor of 1. And no absorption, perfect reflection, is going to be 0. And you see that the high frequencies are being absorbed much better than the low frequencies. That's a wavelength thing. If you think about a 5/8 inch 20 kilohertz wave, it's going to spend more cycles in a piece of 4-inch foam than is a 56-foot wave. Or the other way to look at it, the 56-foot wave, 4-inch foam looks like nothing to it, so it just goes right on through. Sound also refracts. Refraction is the bending of sound waves when they go from one medium with a speed to another medium with a speed. We always saw this as the spoon or the straw sticking in the water. But where we see that in sound in the air is mainly for regions with different humidity or different temperatures. So when you have sound going out of a PA system and you have a bunch of warm bodies of 20,000 people who are enjoying a show and the heat is coming off of them, the sound will bend towards the cool air and actually go up away from them. Sound also diffracts around things. So sound will go around corners. Low frequencies bend easier than high frequencies. Because of the long wavelength, low frequencies will bend much more easily. We all know this because we've lived in the world, and you hear, what do you hear when a car is driving up the street and it has a big sound system in it? The high frequencies are trapped in the car, and all we hear is the bass coming out of the car, boom, boom, boom.
Sorry, I got a little distracted. We were talking about let's see, hold on 1 second here. We were talking about the butter gun, and I'm afraid that I had to ask. Earlier we were talking about it. So I don't have a gun yet, but I do have the response. There's the butter gun. there's our toast getting the butter gun. But we'll work on a better example of it. I just think it's great that you can be in a show and ask for that. One thing what I was going to show here was that I was at the plant, and one of the things that came up in the record plant in Sausalito, and one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that Metallica. Here, I'll show it to you. This gets into our understanding how a lot of these occurs. This is one of the rooms in the plant, and if you look at this area here, this area up here, Metallica actually had them add for the drums. So this is, and if we go into one more shot here, so this whole cavity was added to give the drums more bass, basically allowing larger wavelengths to be, captured without them being absorbed. And so it was an incredible, like, adding that. And I have to admit that when they told me that on the phone, I thought that it was silly. But listening to Michael Urbano, who playing like the In the Air Tonight, dun 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 dun, sounded incredible, like in that space, because that larger cavity allowed for a reverberation that you wouldn't get otherwise. And so it really gave the drums a lot more oomph than you would normally have there. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Roscoe Jones starts us off with from Madison, Indiana. Have we ever answered the age-old question of why certain sounds are more pleasing to the human ear? Do we know scientifically how acoustics affects our enjoyment of music?
Good, Jeff.
So the first thing I would go to is to the overtone series, because that is based in physics. So if you take any type of musical instrument, a open or closed tube of air, the standing waves that occur between walls in a room. So your room will support certain frequencies based on the wavelengths that fit between the walls, which is why most studios do not have parallel walls and they don't build them with the same dimensions. So if you can imagine a 10 by 10 by 10 foot cube room, would be terrible because it would support the same frequency between the left and the right walls, the ceiling and the floor, and the front and the back walls. And so you'd have that one frequency, which is, somewhere around 100 hertz. Again, I'm doing rule of thumb, 1 foot per millisecond. That's going to be 1K is about a foot. So if I go to 10 feet, that's 1/10 that frequency. That's 100 hertz. That's very rough, but it gets me in the ballpark. So somewhere around there, I'm going to have this really big frequency. I basically made an organ pipe in my room by making it 10 by 10 by 10. So, and we will get the overtone sequence, which are the integer multiples of that. So if I have 100 hertz, I would also have 200 hertz, I would have 300 hertz, I would have 400 hertz. Now, all the ones that are doubles, 100 to 200 to 400 to 800, those are octaves. But 300 ends up being a nice musical frequency, and that is an octave plus a fifth. And so that overtone series, I'm trying to look for somewhere I have a chart of overtone series that shows you the musical things that come out of this. And this is how horns work. This is how harmonics on a guitar string work. I just recorded the other day a person who played the French horn, and he also played the natural horn, which is a horn without valves. And he can play all kinds of notes just by changing how he blows into this fixed pipe of air. By blowing harder, he gets different things. But the only ones available to him are the ones in that particular harmonic sequence. And so that's things that musically make up kind of things that are pleasing, because they make up the fundamental scales and chords are based on harmonic sequence.
And I think that one of the things that's usually related to it is what, when we think about it over the last million years, what sounds made us feel safe and what sounds made us feel in danger. Like those are typically, like the things that we don't like to hear are things that oftentimes are related to things that might have, from a species perspective, might have been connected to danger. And the things that we like to hear are things that from a species connected probably meant that we were safe. So those are things to think about when we think about frequencies. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer's up next from Viera, Florida. Acoustic advice sought. Conference room is 30 foot by 30 foot, one glass wall, 2 of sheetrock, 1 window wall, an open ceiling, so no drop tiles, a rally bar, I think that's a Logitech video camera array, an LED opposite the window wall, a U-shaped conference table, thin carpet. Acoustic help.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, with this, like you're asking for advice here, and I don't know how much work and how much expense this facility is willing to put into solving issues, and this would especially come through if you're placing a mic in that room. It's not nearly as bad if it's just being used as a conference room with people in there. But once you say incorporate some sort of conferencing system, web conferencing system, for example, then it's going to be chaos. If they're willing to put in a good amount of investment, I'd completely rebuild the room and fill the walls with double wall it and fill it with insulation, then put fabric on it. Have fabric walls that would kill a lot of the reflections within that room. Also have thicker carpeting, of course, that would help, and also treat the ceiling as well. If they're unable to put that much investment and time and money in it, acoustic panels, like nice dense, like 10 centimeter thick panels on all the drywall walls, as well as what are called clouds, which are acoustic panels hung from the ceiling, usually overlapping with different heights, will kill the reflections coming from the top.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So the panels Mickey is talking about is in the U.S. at least, it's Owens Corning 701. It's linear fiberglass. So that's if you imagine the pink stuff that was in your attic, and that is then compressed down to be rigid. So that usually comes in 2 to 4 inch thicknesses. Rock wool is another one, which is a different material from insulation. But both of them are really good at absorbing sound. The clouds are great because if you can hang the clouds and you can build a frame that the insulation is held there and wrapped in fabric, but there's not a solid surface on either side of the frame, then you can actually get absorption from the sound going up into the frame and also going up into the ceiling and coming down onto the frame. So you kind of get double work there. Same thing if you can mount them off of the walls. It gets a little bit of help, but acoustic panels are kind of your solution if you're not able to sort of rebuild from scratch.
Yeah, from where the sheetrock is, one of the things that I had a client that I just couldn't believe every time they brought us into a conference to how good the audio sounded. Because I usually, when someone looks at a conference room, I'm just like, okay, that's not going to work. Like that's going to be horrible. And they always sounded great. And when I finally visited, I realized why. It's to Mickey's point. There was absorption panels that were 3 inches behind a cloth. It looked totally flat, but it was a cloth membrane that went across it. And then there were absorption behind that. And it was 3 sides of that room were that and part of the fourth one. And it just sucked all the reflection out of the room. And it sounded amazing. And they could do all the things that we say you can't do, which is have big open mics. And, this gets back into understanding the audio process and understanding what you can and can't do with mics based on what you have with the walls. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Brody Hefner in New York City. What are some use cases for this interesting and expensive dummy head stereo mic? And he's got a link there to B&H Photo.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So this is the Neumann KU100 dummy head mic, which they have nicknamed, the creator of this nicknamed it Fritz. So this is a binaural mic. So there are microphones in the ear canals, and it is trying to capture the entire, what we call the head-related transfer function. So it captures the time of arrival of sound getting to 2 different ears from different angles. It captures the head shadowing caused by the head. So that's the diffraction of sound waves around the head. Low frequencies will get to the far ear. High frequencies will not because they don't get around the head. About what frequency? Well, the head's about 6 inches, so that's about 2K. That's when we start to move into the range of head shadowing having an effect. Plus the pinna cues. The pinna are the fleshy parts of your ear on the side of your head. So you can see that this dummy head actually has pinna that is molded to be like skin, or the cartilage of your earlobe. And so that is trying to capture basically what you would hear. And the way to listen to this is through headphones that are placed inside your ear canal so that you don't get a second set of your head listening to this. So dummy head recordings or binaural recordings tend not to work well over speakers, but they work amazingly well over earphones placed in your ear canal so that you're hearing just the dummies head shadowing, time arrival, and pin EQs, not your own. This is also used a lot for testing. So if you imagine you want to do some testing on like an auto interior sound system, you can place this inside the driver's seat of the car and do measurement of what the car's sound system sounds like.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Another practical application that for the KU100 is to place it like in an orchestral recording session. Place it at the position of the conductor, and that captures the perspective that the conductor has when he or she is orchestrating the orchestra or leading the orchestra. So when it comes to the mix stage of that, it can be used sort of as a reference for the mix engineer to listen to, so that they get a better sense of what the conductor is trying to deliver with the piece. Sometimes it's added to the final mix as well, just as an additional element, but it's very useful as a reference.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin. How effectively are vertically hung felt panels for absorption? The office has 14-seat conference table under a dome. Can't centralize a mic high. The dome reflects a lot of the sound back.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, so for controlling sound waves, you really want to it's really dependent on the mass of your treatment. So if these are just panels that are just felt and there's no I think Jeff mentioned earlier the OC Owens Corning 703, or there's no material inside of the panels to capture the sound and control the sound waves from reflecting back, it won't really be as effective. The more mass, the stronger the waves it can control, and the lower the frequencies it can control.
Next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas. How good are sound blankets in soundproofing a room, and which of these on Amazon would be most effective?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, similar to the previous question, you really want mass. The advantage of sound blankets is they are very portable and very easy to set up and take down. So it's often used in use cases like that. So for films that are recording on location, if they need to deaden the space a little bit, then we'll throw sound blankets around the set where it's not in frame. But if you're trying to soundproof a location or a recording studio, for example, it's not the most ideal solution for that.
Jeff?
I think it's important that we define what we're talking about, because Mickey's saying it each time, and he's totally correct about there's room treatment, which is controlling the sound within a room, and then there's soundproofing or sound transmission treatment, which is controlling how sound either leaves a room or external sound comes into a room. And that soundproofing, keeping sound from getting into a room, that mass is really important. As Mickey has said, you need mass to stop low frequencies.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and in the voiceover industry, this is why we tend to buy vocal booths, because it creates a capsule inside of a room, so you have two layers. That's really the only way to decouple your microphone from things like overhead planes, or if you're in an area with trains and things like that. That floating room within a room gives you much more isolation than just treating walls of a room. And so every time I've had to move, I've had to decide, do I use my voice booth, or am I in a quiet enough outside area where the room within the house is enough isolation for me to be able to do my work? I'm really happy because now it is, and I can work in a regular bedroom. But in other places that I've lived, that voiceover booth was incredibly important to create that isolation within another isolating thing to get the noise floor down.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Granville, Illinois. Considering the physics of sound waves and constraints of a typical living room, why do small driver home theater systems sound so good across the audio spectrum?
Jeff?
They're not trying to get huge SPLs, so they're working where they're efficient. Usually they're supported by a subwoofer that still may be a fairly small driver. And oftentimes those are in ported enclosures. So you put them in a box and you have a sound port that allows the frequency to go lower because you have a resonant frequency of the port. And those things all help these small driver systems work well, even down at low frequencies. Again, everything gets affected by size and by frequency, which is wavelength once you put things into the air. There's no wavelength in a DAW. It's just frequencies. But once you go out into the air, then we're dealing with wavelength. And so now driver size matters with how directional a particular driver is. Things generally get more directional as you go down to lower frequencies, longer wavelengths.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, as Jeff had mentioned earlier about inverse square law, your distance is also besides not trying to achieve, excuse me, ear splitting SPL. You're not having the drop off of distance in a small living room or small theater setup from your speakers to the listening point. You also, as we've been talking about some of these other spaces, like that conference room we talked about earlier, you might have square rooms. Usually in a living room, you've got other things that are helping to diffuse sound. You may have a bookshelf or things like that that are minimizing those standing waves or these sorts of things that would be destructive interference. So you can kind of your living space, and you're also used to just hearing everything in your living room. So it just creates an environment where you're used to what things sound like, and there's just naturally things occurring. Again, the size of the room, the distance between the listening position and the speakers, and then the things within the room that are causing sound waves to not bounce around just haphazardly. So,
yeah, and one of the things we have trouble with is that go the other direction into a larger theater experience. And if you mix something that sounds really good in a near field and something that's very close to you, that the physics of all those sound waves changes dramatically when it's in a large space. They don't propagate the same way. They don't propagate as far. Different wavelengths go different distances, and all those things change, making it very hard. That's why there's huge mixing theaters, mixing stages, is because the volume has to be the same size roughly as the theater so that you can see how that physics actually works. And I've had the experience where we've had a near field and a couple hundred feet from the theater, and you can walk in and you listen to the near field and it sounds perfect, and you walk into the theater and it sounds sparse, like immediately, and bassy, and all kinds of other things that are there because it just changes the way those things work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says the original BSS Omnidrive had a meteorology probe that could sense humidity and adjust system EQ accordingly. Do any other products have that capability?
Go, Jeff.
I don't know of any that have their own sensor. I imagine some are tying into the web and can read weather for a particular place. You've heard me many times today talk about a rule of thumb, and we've done it many times on office hours to talk about a rule of thumb for speed of sound. And that rule of thumb, a foot per millisecond, is great for talking generally and estimating. It's also a great check to check your calculations or what a system might have. If you're measuring the delay of a delay speaker, an under balcony speaker, it's a good gut check to say, I know I'm about 50 feet from the stage, so this should be somewhere around 50 milliseconds. If I see 500, I know I'm way off. But it's not exact. And so you need exact in these kind of system processor things. And so having humidity and temperature parameters in there to correct things, if it's doing time delay based on feet or meters, having the ability to calculate based on humidity and temperature and make modifications for your delay speakers, that small change from the rule of thumb or even from the perfect number that changes with humidity can make a difference. So it's important to be precise when setting those delays. And I use the rule of thumb all the time to check, am I in the ballpark? But it's not the number I'm going to punch in to use. It's much better to measure accurately.
Go ahead,
Ed. There are actually there's a few processors for live sound Acoustics makes one that can analyze and monitor atmospheric conditions and then adjust some of the filtering for those conditions as it changes throughout the day. You can also input those manually. If you had a separate external meter, you can go in and punch in the numbers of what your humidity and your temperature is, and then the processor will make those changes.
Good, Jeff.
Yeah, so as Tim put in the chat there, thanks, Tim, wet air is denser, so high frequencies go through wet air better. And the way I think about this, because I tend to work in reverberant rooms, we talk about reverb as being wet. So wetter air makes a wetter room because the reverb will propagate on longer because the high frequency does not get absorbed by the air as easily. So if the room gets dry, the actual reverberation will go down. Now, that doesn't matter if the same effect of humidity happens outside. You don't have to be in a room, and it happens more often outside because the weather is not climate controlled. But that's my easy way to remember wet air is wetter.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri. With the infinite variables of recording outside events, do you have any rules of thumb?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Protect against wind for microphones and protect against weather for everything.
Very good. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Eric Strand in Essex, Connecticut. Does anyone have experience or recommend small meeting booths like this? And he's got a link there.
Have you guys been able to look at this? I didn't quite get time to get to it here. Let's see if we can pop it up here. So this is the small meeting room. Let me get this over to the right thing here.
I would worry about the two parallel panes of glass on the front wall and the back wall.
I always find it interesting that, again, you always feel like someone was a visual, like the thing you have to be careful of is what gets sold oftentimes is the visuals because someone's doing a presentation. So they're not hearing it. And so they don't make a decision here. So if you see this is what he was, the link that we got here. I'm sure it's a little quieter, but two parallel flat panes was created by a visual designer, not an audio designer. So, that's the real challenge there. I would definitely want to do something to at least one of the walls. You can leave one as glass, but I would probably angle those so that they're not straight to the other wall. So you would angle that glass outward. So what I would probably do, and our experts here can fill in a little bit if they want to, but this far wall over here, I'd probably make it soft like these ones at least. So I'd soften that out so I don't have two hard panes going back and forth. The second thing I would do is I would take these walls and I'd pull them out so it goes up at out at an angle by a little bit so that it's not going to create standing waves between the two of them there. And then you can leave the door where it is. So some minor changes to that, which might actually decrease the cost of that box, would probably make a dramatic difference in the quality of the sound there. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So what's your goal here? If it's to have a more private meeting and keep some of the conversation inside the booth, this will probably help you a little bit there. If it's to really isolate you from the outside, it's going to be a much less valuable. But if you're trying to do this as an isolation thing or record or help your meeting or your phone call or something like that, it's going to generally be a disaster because those two parallel hard walls are just going to reflect everything. It's going to sound boxy. It's going to sound thin. It's going to sound ugly. The
thing you have to be careful of is there's no bass traps in there. So what will happen is you'll absorb all the high frequency and then you won't absorb a lot of the low frequency and then everything sounds bassy. So
I actually have a voice booth and I have to put a panel over the one window in it to keep the reflection off of that window from getting back to the mic. That's how bad hard surfaces are for you.
Yeah. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles. What's the best sounding unamplified concert hall you've been in, and what do you think made it sound so good?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm speaking from a recording perspective, but it sure sounded great, and that was Mechanics Hall in Worcester, Mass., one of my favorites, and just a gorgeous space, lots of wood and lots of bumpy surfaces in the plaster and things like that.
That's great. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. In school practice rooms were all small in school. That's what it is. In school practice rooms were all small in size, while concert halls are large and open. Are there ideal room sizes for different instruments, or is the concert hall the best place to practice if available?
I would say the best place to practice is where you're going to do the event. So the closer you can get to it, if it's smaller, it's smaller, it's bigger. But, having the physics be roughly the same definitely makes a big difference. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and the problem is oftentimes those small practice rooms are deadened. They have sound absorption in them, both to keep the room itself from being too loud for the musician and also to cut down on the sound in the room and to prevent sound transmission into the hallway and other practice rooms. So they end up being pretty dead, and players can often overplay in there. If you're a brass player, you wear out your chops much earlier practicing in those dead rooms. So they'd much better if they can practice in the space where they're going to perform.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up again with, when programming lighting cues, especially for time-coded shows, how do you make sure that events in the audio line up with the cues with the speed difference of sound versus light?
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, when lining up a PA system with the other loudspeakers in the room, such as your front fill, side fills, your delay speakers, you usually time align those to the main PA speakers. So you don't really take into account the difference of the speed of light with the lighting cues, because the speed of sound will vary depending on where you are, where the audience is in the room. So you can't really correct for everyone. You usually base the timing of your cues from your front of house position.
Jeff?
Some of that's going to matter how the lights react. Certain lights will react a little slower than others. But also, we're always used to sound occurring behind visuals, because no matter what, if we're more than a few feet away from someone, we're already milliseconds late, even in talking face-to-face with another person. So it's very common. We're completely used to that. What throws us off, and we see this all the time in audio-visual things that we do, is if the sound gets ahead of the video. So in programming those lighting cues, it wouldn't feel necessarily strange if the light came slightly before the sound. Is when it comes slightly after the sound that would be confusing. And they'd want to program it so that they do occur that way.
Next question.
David Brady in New York City is up next. The likes of Ryoji Ikeda and Carsten Nikolai, Alva Noto, create music that is pure manipulated sine waves and white noise. They will use the audio to drive the visuals, which is fascinating, and he's got a link there.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, I think that what's interesting is I have a hard time sometimes. Let's see if I can pull this up here. There's a warning. You can see. I don't have it. You'll just hear it through my mic, but you'll see the. And the interesting thing is that I oftentimes. Here's some more. This is from.
They were focused on really grasping.
What I find with most of these is that it's interesting to see how visuals express themselves in audio, but it's rarely easy to listen to. so I think that a lot of times, there was an app, and I'll try to find it. There was an app a long time ago. I think it was called Alchemist or something, that would let you bring in images and play them. And we would, it was used by a lot of sound designers, I don't know, 30 years ago. And it was interesting because I was always excited, like we could turn the images into sound, but I found that almost anything I did sounded bad, or it sounded hard. I wouldn't say bad, just hard to listen to, because visuals didn't necessarily didn't express themselves well in audio, because you'll hear a lot of things that you wouldn't see. So it is interesting though. I love the idea of taking one thing. I also, that people are doing stuff. If you want to really dive deep into this, people are taking the electro impulses from plants and then feeding those back into music. And when plants get different in stimulus, sun, people walking by them, doing other things, they will emit different electrical impulses, and people are using those and building music out of them, which is a fascinating thing on its own. Next question.
Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri. Have you seen Mark Ronson's Watch the Sound episode on Reverb?
A couple times. It's so good. It's so good. Mark Ronson's, if you haven't watched it, I think it's an Apple TV thing, but Mark Ronson there's an Apple TV thing that's called Watch the Sound. And he has ones on all kinds of different things, whether it's sampling or on, and he has one on Reverb, and he goes to a former mine in I think Scotland. They were some of the largest reverb in the world, where they're doing impulse records. He's talking about the Capitol Records echo chambers that they have, and how they work. So there's a lot of different things that he covers there. So I would watch all of those. Those are your homework if you're doing this. Really, really good stuff. Other ones to watch are This Is Pop, which is on Netflix. Song Exploder, which I think is also on Netflix. These are not necessarily sound ones, but really good ones. And another one that, if it comes into your town, I don't think it's released yet, is 32 Sounds. Tlaloc got me hooked on that, and I actually went to see it. They actually hand you headphones for everybody in the theater to watch this, and it's a mixture of ambisonic and binaural. We talked to him. He did a lot of binaural, and he shows binaural, but it's a mixture of ambisonic, stereo, binaural, all different kinds of records. He said, if he had committed I think he had started with binaural, and if he had committed to that, he would have been in trouble. Like he said, there was some of the stuff was saved by ambisonic and other sets of recording. And so, anyway, really fascinating, like just incredible movie. If you see it touring, again, because it requires him to give everybody a headset, I don't think he's released it yet. I would love to see it on an Apple. If anyone's watching from Apple, I'd love to see it on the Vision Pro. Just saying, it'd be really great. Go ahead, Jeff.
So you talk about capturing spaces with impulse response. I was in a Civil War era barrel vault, so brick barrel vault that was used as a battery to store gunpowder. And someone was filming me with their phone, and I just clapped my hands and actually took that phone recording and literally, I didn't do any processing to it. I used it as the impulse response for a convolution reverb, and it was pretty convincing for that space. Obviously there are noise problems with it. It's not the right way to capture an impulse response, but I would encourage people, if you happen to be in an awesome space, just do that. Just get some quiet, have someone record, clap your hands, and grab that recording and go play with it.
And what are you using to do that? What are you using to build the reverb from there?
I was doing that in Logic with the Logic Spatial Designer, and literally was putting that audio file. I just trimmed it to my clap. And that was the impulse, because an impulse is a very short, it's supposed to be infinitely short sound. So a clap was that, and it's to excite things. So it's not a perfect way. It's much better to use a swept tone that is deconvolved, but literally the clap in the space was an impulse that created an impulse response, and I just threw that as the file. That audio file was my impulse response.
It's amazing. Yeah,
it's great fun to play with.
Oftentimes when I go into an event, just to know what I'm dealing with, you'll see me walk in and I click. I go, and that's me just making decisions. I'm listening to. I know what that sounds like. I know this is a really roomy room, or it's going to be dead, or it's going to be whatever. But it's kind of my natural tendency to walk into a new room that I'm going to do an event and start clicking to do my bat like what am I dealing with here? Next question.
Glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Next question.
Rian Smith in Trinidad, West Indies. So how would you all manage mixing video walls or projection delay from the video mixer with the audio delay for people standing at the front versus the audio reaching people's ears at the back of a huge concert?
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, in a sound reinforcement situation, we are reinforcing the sound of the person that is physically on stage. We don't correct for the delays that happen on projection or on screens. We want to keep it as true as possible with the actual person on stage. And this is why when doing IMAG, it's very important to have a fully Gen-lock system from lens, from camera all the way to the screens or the projector.
Next question.
Next one comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Do you tune a concert hall differently based on the size of the audience?
Well, I think in a lot of ways you have to think about the audience. The hardest part is that the room is different when the audience is there versus when they're not. So that's the thing you have to really, I think that becomes always a challenge is we're like, well, it sounds this way now, but when you put 15,000 people in here, it's going to sound a completely different way, because they're big water bodies that are pretty soft that absorb a lot of sound. Go ahead, Jeff.
So it used to be in tuning a room back in the ancient days, the last millennium, the tools we had were feeding pink noise through it and looking at a real-time analyzer, which is not something you really want to do with 15,000 people in the audience. Generally, people don't react well to, 95 dB SPL pink noise running for long periods of time. But thankfully, system processors and system analysis uses source-independent measurements. So you can take the output of your mixing console and it goes to your PA, and you can also take that output and feed it into one channel of your test system, and a microphone is into the other channel of the test system, and it can give you the transfer curve, the difference between the two of those, so that even while the audience is there, you can make analytical judgments about what is happening through the entire system. And you can see how the audience has changed that and perhaps make differences. And over time, going from room to room to room, these professionals that do this, they can know generally when the audience comes in, this is what is going to happen, and they can work on the system before the audience comes in, knowing what it's going to do.
Mickey?
Yeah, as Alex mentioned earlier, audience members, and this isn't limited to concert halls, but pretty much any venue that you have a PA system in. When audience walks in, audiences are good sound absorbers, and they also raise the temperature of the room. So, and these two factors affect how sound propagates within the space. So yeah, you can sort of safely assume that there will be a change in the sound and how sound propagates when the audience comes in. And just to add to what Jeff mentioned earlier about room analysis systems, such as SMART, that walk-in music or that background music that plays while people are coming into the room can be used to feed the analysis tools so that you can get a constant reading of how the room is at that point in time. So you can make your adjustments as you see that change happening. And as you get more experience, you can start to predict and maybe shelf. Because when you tune a room without an audience there, in some places within the venue, it may sound too bright, but that will get dulled down as the audience comes in.
One of the things I'm working on right now, not so much to test the audio, but to exercise speakers. I have a public space and I have 5.1 sound, and I need to be able to know that that's all working while the audience is there. And so one of the things I'm building is some music that you kind of see it go from one place to the other, and the visuals go from one place to the other. If you're an operator, you'll know what you're looking at. You'll say, oh, that all the speakers are working. If you are an audience person, it just looks like a cool design with some music, and so thinking about how you can test things is interesting. And I think that you want to think about how you can do that once the audience is there, because you might have to test that process, but in a way that might be entertaining. Next question.
Rion Smith Trinidad is back, and this time he says, how would you record audio and video for a popular beach to put on YouTube?
Go ahead, Bill.
Not quite enough information here, Rion, because my concern is, are you looking to record the ambient sound of the beach? Are you looking to record somebody walking down the beach and they're talking? I mean, those would be two completely different approaches. In the environmental approach, your biggest challenge is going to be the point of view of the camera. I would be worried always without anything like a pretty broad spectrum Omni, but even if I was using that, as I walk along, is somebody going to be having an argument or a chat on the beach next to me? Is it crowded? And because of the inverse square principle, those things will come really forward in the mix. And if I'm just trying to get an ambient of the overall crowd, that could be not what I'm looking for. So it's a little delicate there. If I'm trying to record the actual dialogue of somebody walking down the beach, then I want to get a mic as close to them as I possibly can, put a lav on them or something to isolate them from the background. And then I would probably, in post, add some nat sound from the crowd that I could control and balance the amount of natural sound versus the content that I need my audience to hear. Those are kind of the things I'm always thinking of if I'm in a beach kind of environment. Also, you can't negate wind. If you're on a beach, wind is going to be a serious factor. So you're going to have some kind of wind abatement, a Rycote Softy or something like that on your mics. And Mickey has done this much more than I have, and I'm going to listen to him.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, Rion posted in the chat. He mentioned ambient sound from one spot. So with that, I would start off with a stereo pair of some sort, and an XY configuration, 90 degrees, would give you a nice natural capture of the sonic image of it. You can also go with higher channel count, like a 5.1 microphone. There's one from DPA that's fairly popular, or even ambisonic. But I would also go ahead and, aside from just like a general overall ambience, I would go ahead and take spot effects, record spot effects. Say, take a shotgun 416 as a popular choice, MKH60 or MKH8060, and do, say, for example, multiple perspectives of the waves. One in a close perspective, another medium, another one far away. And you can use the correct perspective depending on what you are trying to put together, what works best for it. And also, when doing spot effects, you typically want quite a tight pickup on that. So hence why I would usually recommend a shotgun. And look around, you see what else makes sound in the area. Is there a little, like, ice cream cart, for example, someone's ringing a bell, capture those, see whatever element you have around you in that venue, and get that nice and isolated so you can build your soundscape however you want.
That's great. It's great. A really, really good hour. Thanks to our audio experts for showing up, and our panel, all of our panelists for being here for the first hour and the second hour. We really appreciate everybody showing up here. This is really, really great panel to talk about this. So we really appreciate you guys showing up for a Wednesday and having this discussion. And hopefully we'll see you guys more often on the Wednesdays, because this is a great discussion. And thanks to of course, the producers asking all those great questions, moving it forward. Thanks to the incredible team on the back end who is managing this, figuring out what we're going to do for these second hours, figuring out how to do it, building the tools that do this. So it's a huge village that makes this possible, and we really appreciate everybody's contribution. We traveled 79,000 miles today, 127,000 kilometers, and that is 625 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. They're still doing 32 sounds. It's in Traverse City on March 12th. What is that, about a week? Ithaca, Boston, Ithaca, Lincoln, Austin, Texas, Boston, and then Austin on April 10th.
From Boston to Austin.
Boston. Yeah, so but I think that if you are in any of those areas, Ithaca, Boston, Traverse City, Lincoln, Nebraska, Austin, Texas, you should find out. 32 sounds. It's worth going. It's worth going to see it. That's all I got to say. It's really, if you're into sound, if you like this hour, it'll be a fun place to watch some sounds. All right, man. That's too much, Chris. Too much. You've gone too far. All right. See you later.